Kia ora. Good evening, everybody up in Auckland. My name is Steve Butler. I'm been sort of fighting the battle against light pollution for coming up to 25 years. Been an interesting sort of a trip, and just like to share with you some of the latest information or latest ideas or views of what's going on in the world, typically around the change that the industry is going through, particularly with the LED lighting. So I've sort of chosen the title of The Changing Colour of Light. So it probably should be more specific than that. It's the changing colour of artificial light. And I just learned recently, or just last week, that we should stop calling it artificial light and call it anthropogenic light. Apparently light is light. You can't have artificial light, apparently. Never mind. I've got a couple of hats to wear. I've got on here the Dark Skies Group of the Royal Astronomical Society of New Zealand. Currently President of the Royal Astronomical Society and Chair of the Aoraki Mackenzie International Dark Sky Reserve, based down in the South Island. Now, must pass on my concerns for all the Aucklanders, all the current conditions that you're living in and working in. It's been quite difficult times for everybody up that way. I just, for a bit of inspiration, I thought I would pass this on. So there's something perhaps you could be doing while you're locked down. Isaac Newton discovered laws of gravity, optics, and he invented calculus. So I'm sort of looking forward to some of the great discoveries that might come out of Auckland in the next month or so. You also got started on the artwork of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. So I think you could, any sort of creativity is very welcome. This little news article here is nearly 100 years old. I thought it was quite an interesting starting point. The first paragraph up there talks about illuminating engineers. This is probably about the turn of the last century, were seriously and emphatically debating whether the street lighting intensities on residence streets should be equal to that of half a moon or quarter moon, or at least about those relative values. So, if we were lucky to turn our lighting back down to even full moon intensity, I think we'd be feeling pretty successful. So in the early days, the principal objective was to provide enough light to enable pedestrians to walk without colliding with obstructions or with other persons, and to find their homes, and to permit horse-drawn vehicles safely to navigate the more or less quiet thoroughfares and side streets. Walking and colliding with horses or anything else would be a bit unusual today. So today, the problem of handling with safety the ever-increasing auto traffic, the value of high illumination as a police safety precaution, the importance of well-lighted streets informing public opinion regarding the desirability of certain districts. So those considerations there are still present. Police safety or crime safety is always one of the main catch cries for the amount of lighting that's required in an area or in an urban area. The importance of well-lighted streets informing public opinion regarding the desirability of certain districts, and that's still a major problem, is that the feeling out there is that more lighting is better, makes a town look prosperous and exciting, and so we still have that problem that people desire to have lots of lighting around the place. And the result has been an awakening of interest, which has brought new ideas for proper illumination intensities, which has developed new methods of installation and of design and spacing of units, which has made city authorities study street lighting budgets on a basis other than that of a necessary evil. There's a couple of key words in there: the new methods of installation and of design and spacing of units. And there, the design and spacing of units is probably one of the key turning points of the problem, or the starting point of light pollution. The spacing of units, it was about spacing the power poles as far apart as you could, and then spilling the light from the lamps as far and wide as you could as well. So the 2 points was, if you could space the poles wider apart, it cost less to put them in. But at that stage, about 1920s through to the even now, the cost of energy, particularly in the States, was so low that they actually installed more and more lights to try and use up the energy that was being produced. Coal-fired generation plants were difficult to control, and so you didn't really want to turn them off over the night period. So the way of making use of energy that wasn't being used in industry was to put in more and more streetlights. So that's where a lot of the original, or the problematic design, lighting design, certainly for street lighting, has come from, is that desire to make use of all of the electricity that was available. So we've still got those problems nearly 100 years later. But we are now starting to realise that rather than just throwing light into the environment and making ourselves look prosperous and exciting and dynamic, light is one of the most powerful stimuli to impact our health and the health of and existence of everything around us, and therefore we must be careful how we use it. So one of the sort of diagrams that you will see quite a few of during this talk is this diagram here, which is normally known as a spectral power diagram, or distribution, spectral power distribution. And it's a way of looking at the characteristics or the spread of the power within the spectrum of a particular light source. And so across the bottom of the range is the wavelengths of the particular colours of that light source in nanometers, and up the left-hand side up to basically a scale of 0 to 100, or normally 0 to 1, as a percentage of relative energy. And so what they do with these spectral power distribution diagrams is to allocate the total or the maximum power at 1 being the bright, or the most powerful, most energy wavelength of that spectrum is allocated 1, and then the energy from each of the other spectral lines is then proportional to that maximum spectrum line. So it gives you a quick overview of where the spectral energy is in any particular light source. So if we look at the change in colours from natural to artificial light colours, on the left we have sort of probably a midday blue sky without the sun in it. So we're just looking totally at the colour of the sky, or the spectrum of the sky. Very predominantly a blue, the maximum energy wavelength is in the blue range. The colour temperature of the blue sky is at about 7,500 degrees Kelvin, It's an industry's way of, lighting industry method of describing the colour. So we've got a 7,500 degree Kelvin colour spectrum. The second diagram from the left is direct sunlight. So the sun itself has less blue content than the blue sky, and that's because the atmosphere has filtered out and scattered a lot of the blue content of the direct sunlight. So the maximum spectral line for the direct sunlight has shifted more to the green part of the spectrum. Full moon, a colour temperature of just over 4,100 degrees Kelvin. Again, the maximum spectral line or energy line from the full moon is well into the red end of the spectrum. Just making a point that New Zealand preferred street lighting is 4,100 degrees Kelvin. So just hang on to that thought. A candle, colour temperature down about 2,000 degrees Kelvin, and most of its energy is well off to the very far red end, almost into infrared, and that suggests that it doesn't produce a lot of light, but it produces a lot of heat. And then into the first of the artificial lamps, and these were predominantly the light source for outdoor lighting, and particularly street lighting, prior to the arrival of LED lighting. So colour temperature of just over 2,000 degrees Kelvin, and very much in the orange range of the spectrum for its maximum power. Again, just a quick overview. You might not see this one quite so clearly, but a daylight at noon is top left, 5,500 Kelvin. Sunset, so it's shifting off to the red end because of more atmospheres filtered out the blue levels. And there's a small note here that falling levels of blue light trigger sleep. So this is just the first indication that the quality of lighting or does have an effect on us and life around us. The middle left is a compact fluorescent lamp, quite a spiky spectrum, maximum power around the green area of the spectrum. Incandescent lamp is quite marginally sort of similar to a sunset, little blue light around there. So we can see from daylight quite a lot of blue, less blue at sunset, and then obviously at night there's no blue. Cool white LED lamp down on the bottom left, very strong blue output. So more blue light confuses body clocks at night, so our circadian rhythm gets disrupted if we're exposed to blue light at night. In the evenings, warmer, high levels of red and less blue light are healthier. So if you use a warm white LED lamp, they are saying it's at 3,000 degrees Kelvin, and most people are pushing for much lower than 3,000 Kelvin. So just then a review of artificial lighting, just quickly. Low pressure sodium, these are no longer being produced anywhere in the world. The spectrum from these really very orange lamps is very, very narrow spectrum and based right in the middle of the yellow part of the spectrum, just below 600 nanometers. A high pressure sodium lamp, which is very common around New Zealand, quite a spiky, much broader spectrum, but not much energy output at most of the range of colours, quite a strong peak around the green. Third from the left is high pressure mercury lamp, even more spiky and a bit more energy than the high pressure sodium. Very strong green signal, a lot of energy coming out at the green level. So in the upper diagram, there's quite a green tinge to mercury lamps. So they're actually quite noticeable if you look at a city image at night and see a greenish coloured light. It's probably a high pressure mercury lamp. On the right, ceramic metal halides. These only had about a 10-year life, sort of coming in between the high pressure sodiums in New Zealand and then the LEDs arrived. These lamps, very white, quite intense light source, fairly broad distribution of energy across the spectrum. A few spikes in the towards the red end, reasonably strong blue signal in them. And then came the LEDs, and an LED as used for general outdoor lighting is a source of blue light. So the LED itself only generates blue light at about 460 nanometers. So to convert, blue light isn't particularly pleasant, not very nice for outdoor lighting. So to convert that blue light, there's a phosphor coating applied, or a combination of phosphor and other elements. And the phosphor's role is to absorb the blue light and to translate that light into a much broader spectrum, of much broader colour. And so by doing that, the manufacturers are able to create a white light source from that original blue LED. So across the bottom of the screen, we have the spectral power distribution diagrams. So the original LED is on the left, very strong blue signal. So second from the left is an LED cold white at about 6,200 Kelvin, still with a very strong blue component, but the phosphor that's been applied is starting to produce colours across the rest of the spectrum. Third from the left is around 4,100 Kelvin, and you'll recall me saying that that's about the level of New Zealand street lighting. So still a very strong blue signal, but a stronger spectral range in the green through to the red. So a warm white LED, and this one is shown at about 3,200 Kelvin. So again, 3,000 Kelvin is allowed by NZTA, or New Zealand Transport Agency, to be used in dark sky protection areas. But in our view, that's still far too high. There's still quite a strong blue signal, but the phosphor is now starting to generate more energy out of the yellow and orange into the red part of the spectrum. A warm white, or double warm white, around 2,000, nearly 2,200 Kelvin. And this colour of lighting here was recently approved for use in the Aoraki Mackenzie, or in the Mackenzie district, right across the district. So that has almost got rid of the blue portion of the original blue LED. The two diagrams on the right, the first one is a LED PC amber, so that's a phosphor coated still, an amber colour, so the output is pretty much an amber, sort of orangey, yellowy orange colour. On the right is a red plus amber. Now, I haven't come across those before, but I suspect that's two different LEDs in the fitting, which would merge to give you a more of an amber colour. Again, those last two have got no blue component to the spectrum at all. And just to review all of that, this is the spectral output of a whole number of LEDs from different manufacturers, and we can see on the left the light coming from the original blue LED, sort of leaking straight through the phosphor coating, unconverted. And then everything in this orange box to the right is the spectrum generated by the phosphor coatings. It's quite revealing. And then, you know, we're just touching now, starting to become available, this blue-free lighting. On the left was the original low pressure sodiums, very narrow single band in the yellow. Excuse me, they're no longer being manufactured. In the middle is an amber LED. Now, I'm not exactly sure how these are created, but I have heard them called narrow band amber LEDs. So I think that is a separate technology, but I'm not sure. So there's no blue component for that that lamp, and then we've got the phosphor coating amber lamp, and that is a well, put it this way: the amber light in the centre is probably the closest to the original low pressure sodium spectrum that we have had so far in terms of LED source. And then the PC amber light is a much broader version, has a much broader spectrum than either the low pressure sodium or the amber light. So that's a sort of a quick run through of where the lighting has been and where it's come to. So we look now at sort of how we respond to light, the human visual range. And if we start at the top, there's black numbers through the almost the middle of the screen is illuminance in lux. And so in the central range, we've got around twilight. So to the right is daytime, to the left is nighttime. If we come down, the lighting conditions running through the diagram: cloudy at night, starry night, clear starry night, moonlight, indoor lighting, cloudy sunny day, right through to directly looking at the sun up into the discomfort band. So we go from 10 to the 6th lux down to 10 to the -6 lux. And so within that range, so our visual range can cope with that very broad range of lighting levels. Now, our eyes do it by making use of two different visual receptors in our eyes. So in the low light conditions, the eyes make use of rods, and in the daytime conditions, they make use of cones. So there's many more cones in the eyes for daytime vision and fewer rods for nighttime vision. The cones for daytime vision are typically located closer around the fovea or the focal point in your eyes, and then out across the peripheral. The rods are typically not found in the fovea, but spread around for more peripheral type vision. In the central range of illumination, there is a crossover where the rods and the cones both function to some degree. So then across the bottom of the screen, visual function, this combination of rods and cones provides us with what's described for nighttime vision as scotopic vision. To the right for daytime vision is photopic vision, and then in the central range where we cross over and make use of rods and cones is called mesopic vision. So just to, for street lighting, their design range would probably come through in about the indoor lighting range, around 25 lux for reasonably busy suburban streets. Get lit to about 25 lux. So that gives you an idea that when lighting engineers are designing for pedestrian and street and vehicle traffic, they are pushing our vision, our visual performance up into the photopic or daytime lighting range. So if we look, this diagram here is talking to us, telling us that for photopic vision, and that's the daytime vision, our vision is, the peak performance for our vision is centered around the sort of green into the yellow range of the spectrum, about 560 nanometers. So if at night when our vision is dark adapted and we're using the rods, our vision shifts, our peak performance of our vision shifts more to the left, more into the about 480, 500 nanometers. So you just keep an eye on that. Sorry about the pun. Keep that in mind, that our vision does shift. It's just a different way of classifying or filtering spectral types. This is the Johnson-Morgan UBV system, your system used for classifying stars by spectral types, based on ultraviolet being the U band to the left, blue being the B band sort of central left, and visual being the green band on the screen. Our sort of human vision is slightly offset, so that'll be the photopic sort of efficiency range over there, which closely aligns with the green V band on this chart. So ultraviolet to the left, out at the very blue end of the spectrum, visual spectrum for humans. The blue range around 460 nanometers, and the visual range roughly 550 nanometers. Now, this chart here is quite interesting in terms of if you think about the effectiveness of lighting. And the LEDs were introduced and have become very favoured for lighting because they're relatively low energy consumption compared to earlier technologies. They're durable and they last a long time. So down the left-hand side is a range of lighting sources, so incandescent lamp, fluorescent lamp, high-pressure sodium, and then into the LEDs, down through there are various colours and colour temperatures. The spectrum, you've seen these diagrams before. The one on the left-hand side of that column is as detected by a machine or by a spectrometer. So that gives you the full range of the colours produced by that light source. The one to the right is from the human eye's perspective. So of that total output, what are we actually seeing? And so that gives you an idea of the effectiveness of that light source. The SRI column is Spectrum Resemblance Index. So for the incandescent bulb at the top, we're getting a very good impression of a full visual spectrum for the human eye. So that's received quite a high rating. The next one down, a fluorescent tube, it's got some gaps in terms of what we're seeing under that black line, and so the spectral resemblance index has dropped away. And so, for a red LED down the bottom of the screen, it's quite low. Just a bit of a closer look up at that. From the human eye perspective, we are seeing that as a pretty good light source. So an incandescent bulb, the old screw-in or bayonet fitting bulbs, were a pretty effective source of light for human vision. Fluorescent tube, sort of struggling a bit under there. On the right-hand column, we've got a colour rendition index. So the ability for this light source to make things look, to appear quite natural in their colours. So if you turned on an incandescent lamp inside, everything would look the right colour. So that received a very good 100% rating. And the colour temperature of that incandescent lamp is about 2,300 Kelvin. So it's quite an interesting little chart, this. And what I see in it is that even though the LEDs are quite energy efficient producing light, they actually produce a lot of light that's not useful to the human eye. So, a lot of this blue out here is not visible or not being used, not contributing to human vision. And so while it's energy efficient, it's not an effective light source. And that blue light actually has quite an impact on the surrounding ecosystems and sky visibility. This, just moving on now to, we have experienced the shift from high pressure sodium lamp lighting to LED lighting, and so it's given us an opportunity to monitor the effectiveness of that, or what the effect has been on our environment. And so this a survey was carried out over Tucson in Arizona. Tucson is the home city for the International Dark Sky Association. So they're an LED streetlight conversion from 2014 to 2017. And so John Barentine, who was formerly the policy manager, international policy manager for the IDA, he used a sky quality meter and an unmodified Canon camera to monitor the sky over a 3-year period. And so they their thing was to measure night sky brightness changes from high pressure, mixture of high and low pressure sodiums through to fully shielded 3000 Kelvin LEDs. And so they reported a decrease in sky glow. And, I've had quite a number of people tell me that, around New Zealand after an LED refit, that things are a lot darker. The sky seems to be a lot darker locally, just to their eyes. But however, this survey did not carry out a colour analysis. So a second survey has been carried out in Madrid, and this was an evolution of brightness and colour. And so the brightness and colour was carried out by the University of Complutense de Madrid. It used Johnson B, V and R sky brightness data, sky quality meter, and a telescope encoder sky centre, typically known as a TESS, broadband photometry. So for every night between 2010 and 2020. And so major changes in sky brightness and colour took place but during 2015 to 16, when a sizable fraction of the street lamps in Madrid changed from high pressure sodiums to LEDs. So again, there's a major change in brightness and colour. The sky brightness detected in the Johnson B band, that's the blue band that we saw before, darkened by 14% from 2011 to 2015, and then brightened by 32% from 2015 to 2019. And that's the effect of those blue-rich LEDs being installed. So while they've noticed, certainly a change in brightness and colour when they looked at the B band, the filtered light in the blue part of the spectrum, there was a significant brightening occurred. And so in summary of that, Madrid's high-pressure sodium street lamps remain a strong contributor to the night sky brightness in the visual and R components. The R would be red, a red band in that system. The new LED lights change the proportion of the night sky's brightness in the B and the blue and the visual components. So without careful design, a white LED street light refit is not optimal to reduce light pollution, even after reducing the electric power because of the high content of blue light. So the relevant energy savings are not due to the lamp's energy efficiency, but the dimming capabilities and the lower upward light output ratio of the LEDs compared to traditional lighting. So the ULOR, upward lighting output ratio of the LEDs, is that because they are a flat source, all the LEDs are in a flat plane and they're pointed directly downwards. So as opposed to the high pressure sodiums, which were in a bulb and often tilted up to the sky. So it's the physical directional control and shielding of the LEDs, which is much more efficient. They can direct the light where it needs to be. And so in summary, there was a small decrease in sky brightness following the streetlight retrofit in 2015, but these changes were later reversed. So, if you're doing monitoring of sky brightness, be a wee bit careful about what you're using, what you're looking for, what you're measuring. So in terms of sky glow or sky luminance, there's an interesting little chart here. So there's a range of light sources down the left-hand side of this sheet here. The central line through here is an indicator of the relative magnitude change if you use each of these light sources. So to the right of that central line, you've lost up to nearly 1.5 magnitudes of sky brightness, darker to the left. And so one of the earlier high pressure sodiums has been used as the base reference point. Oops. So to the a brighter coloured or a hotter coloured 2500 Kelvin high pressure sodium is already sort of 3/4 of a magnitude brighter, or contributes about 3/4 of a magnitude in brightness to the sky. So the PC amber, that was the very narrow band phosphocoator amber LED, would brighten the sky still at about, say, 0.2 of a magnitude. The 2200 Kelvin LEDs were protected almost a half a magnitude, and so that's the lighting that was approved by NZTA for the Mackenzie Dark Skies, Mackenzie district. So even, you know, with what's available and what can be purchased and what can be installed, we're still struggling to meet, you know, the original high pressure sodium lamps. A generic amber LED is the only one that improved the situation over the high pressure sodiums, and that's, you know, it gave an improvement of light, sky luminance, at 1 1/4 magnitude. So there's, you know, there's ongoing information available. Who wish some of this was available a bit earlier than it has become available. That's part of the issue, is that research is following the technology. Another way of monitoring sky brightness, certainly, you know, globally, is, you know, satellite-based monitoring, and this is a very useful satellite. This one has on board a component called the Visual Infrared Imaging Radiometer suite. That's the device there that is constantly scanning the surface of the Earth. So on clear nights, it's assessing all of the light visible off the surface of the planet. It's all analysed and normalised, I guess, and then reported pretty much constantly, almost in live time. So this data can be accessed from a website that is updated constantly. The website is this lighttrends.lightpollutionmap.info. There was an earlier version that allowed you to sort of indicate, you know, spot check brightness levels anywhere on Earth, but this one is now giving you trend data from 2012 through to current times. And so what you do is you sort of nominally draw a polygon around the area of interest, and so that's what I did for Auckland. I just pulled up their map, drew a polygon around the brighter area of Greater Auckland, and then generated the map. So a very simple process, and there's the trend line is indicating that there is a discernible but gradual increase in brightness from 2012 through to 2021. Now, I'm not sure how far through the conversion to LEDs Auckland is, but I know you're underway. So one of the things that I've realised with these is that when the LED lighting retrofit has started, they often start to see a drop-off in brightness towards the end of the period that we're looking at here. So I've recharted this information for 2012 to 2021. And here we go here. So again, from Auckland, from exactly the same data, but just over the final 2 years of that period, 2.5 years, there's a very distinct drop-off in the trend. So you would immediately say, oh, well, you know, the LED retrofit is having an effect. It's starting to darken the sky or darken light emission, the radiance from Auckland, radiance being the amount of light being radiated up into the sky. These just for some comparisons, various locations around the country. So, you know, Oamaru's got a very strong drop-off. Hibiscus Coast is very strong growth or brightening trend. I suspect that's a urban sprawl or urban development, just increasing population in that area. Levin's got a distinct but fairly scattered downward trend. So you can do this for any area on the globe. There is a limit to the size of the polygon that you can draw, though. So I can't do a total one for New Zealand, which would be quite interesting. So just to explore that trend information a bit further, we have here two spectral charts. For the top one is for high pressure sodium, so a little bit of blue, predominantly red based spectrum. The bottom one is a sort of typical LED with a bright blue spike, and then quite a bit of colour through the green and a yellow, orange, red part of the spectrum. Now, if we are to monitor the sky glow effect from these two different light technologies, here's the handheld sky quality meter that's very common and available. I think Astrons supply these. So the sensitivity of this sky quality instrument ranges from the blue end of the spectrum, but stops a bit short of the red end of the spectrum. So we're not seeing any particular change with this instrument through the red end of the spectrum. So there's a bit of a shortfall there. It doesn't quite cover the full range of the human visual range, which is around 400 to 700 nanometers. So the second instrument that we've referred to in some of those earlier surveys was the Tess Instruments, and these are usually connected to the internet, constantly monitoring. I think there's 2 or 3 of these around New Zealand. They monitor every few seconds, 24 hours a day, so you can see day-night patterns, full moon, lunar patterns, cloud cover, all sorts of things. These are great information. The information is loaded up onto the internet, and you can view it, view any of these instruments anywhere in the world. So at this stage, these instruments cover from the blue end of the spectrum, the visual spectrum for humans, right beyond the red end of the spectrum. So we're seeing, the full range of the human visual range. And then the third one that we've just touched on for the trend information is the VIRS, the Visual Imaging Infrared Spectrum, the satellite instrument. And that's well shifted off to the red end of the spectrum. So it misses out, it starts about 500 nanometers, misses out on all of this blue information. But for a satellite that was designed through the early part of the 2000s, not launched till 2012, it's quite understandable that they designed their instruments to pick up the typical lighting that was, the industry standard at the time. And given that a lot of these earlier lamps generated a lot of heat, a lot out into the infrared range of the spectrum, it's quite understandable that they established their sensitivity range off offset into the red infrared range of the spectrum. So just to clarify that, here was our spectrum from a high pressure mercury lamp in the human visual range, and that portion on the left is represented by this small portion here, and the rest of it is still being emitted by the high pressure mercury lamp well into the infrared or the heat thermal area of the spectrum. And so, you know, the VERS instrument was probably designed to look for, you know, what was common in the lighting industry out into the infrared part of the spectrum. So this was a recent article or report from the University of Exeter. The first information of global trends in nocturnal power emissions reveals an acceleration of light pollution. So again, they've been, while considerable uncertainty remains, it is clear that light emissions have increased by at least 49% over the 25-year period studied, and that this estimate is likely to be conservative. The transition to blue-rich solid-state LED lighting likely masks a much larger increase that is under-detected by existing panchromatic satellite data. So the blue-rich LEDs are causing real concern in terms of monitoring and detection of what's going on, but 49% increase over a 25-year period is, my understanding, exceeds population growth. It sort of indicates an increase in use of outdoor lighting, and it's one of the risks of the introduction of LED technology is that because they're cheaper to run and last a lot longer, it's worthwhile to put them in. It's for those people that like a lot of light at night, it's cheaper to do, and you can have different colours and different control systems on them and things, so it's more tempting, more attractive to put in more lighting. So we've got a problem, you know, it's a growing problem and it's a changing problem. One of the other aspects, of course, is light propagation through the atmosphere, and this diagram is quite a nice diagram just showing the various paths that lighting takes. In the atmospheric conditions, cloudy conditions have a large potential impact on sky glow within the defined city area, and that's, of course, when you've got a lot of lighting, outdoor lighting, and then it clouds over, you get a lot of reflection from the cloud back down again. And a study a few years ago in Berlin indicated that there was a 10-fold increase in ambient lighting conditions on the ground within Berlin compared, on a cloudy night compared to a starry night. So clouds reflect, transmit or absorb all wavelengths of light fairly evenly, and the resulting diffusion of the reflected light contributes to localized sky glow. It's fairly obvious. Clouds eventually prevent any light from reaching a distant observer, although longer wavelengths continue to propagate further than shorter wavelengths. So clear conditions result in more scattering and attenuation of shorter wavelengths than longer ones. So in clear conditions, more scattering and attenuation of shorter wavelengths, that's the blue end of the spectrum, than longer ones. For a local observer, this means potentially a bluer sky glow than the spectral power distribution of the original source. So even though the lamps might look white, you will get a strong blue sky glow. But it also means that the shorter wavelengths are depleted from the projected beam faster than longer wavelengths. So this longer wavelengths thereby affect sky glow more for distant observers under clear conditions. So this diagram sort of indicates what that previous paragraph was telling us, in that we have different light sources here from a low pressure sodium, high pressure sodium, and then a range of LED color temperatures. And so up the left-hand side, we have scotopic sky brightness ratio compared to the low pressure sodium. So this is scotopic being dark adapted human vision. So for a low pressure sodium, this is how visible it would be from a source over a distance up to 300 kilometers. So at 0 kilometers, there's the sky brightness for a approved New Zealand street light at 4,100 Kelvin is 6.5 times more contribution to sky glow than for a low pressure sodium lamp. So there immediately is some of the issues that we're faced with, is the changing technology. So we've shifted from a high pressure sodium lamp, which was already sort of 1.5 times greater or 2 times greater than the low pressure sodium. When we start getting up into these high LEDs, we've got a major problem. The drop-off is quite dramatic in terms of the blue, and the next diagrams will sort of show you a bit about what's going on. And this photo was taken from the top of the Remarkables near Queenstown. So it's looking down from the top of the Remarkables onto Queenstown, almost central part of Queenstown, Frankton Arm along the arm of the lake, and then Frankton is the airport in the middle, and the Frankton commercial development, 5 Mile, Ladies Mile, I think it might be called. So the roadway along Kelvin, around Frankton Arm, is predominantly high pressure sodium, and it's got very little nominal sky glow visible above it. To the left in the central Queenstown district, these lamps in here will have been there predominantly for quite a while, so they're probably metal halides, the whiter ones. So you've got a white glow across above central Queenstown. But coming across to the right around the Frankton development, this is very new, last few years, and most of the outdoor lighting would be LED based, so a blue rich light source, and you can see this short distance attenuation or scattering of that shortwave blue light. So that another view of the same issue is from looking down from above Arrowtown and looking back across towards Queenstown itself, and there's a very strong blue glow coming from that Frankton development. So while the oranger, warmer coloured lights are still visible from a long distance, the major contribution to localised sky glow is from those short wavelength blue lights. So the other issues that we have, not just sky visibility, but there are issues around that blue contribution to health concerns. LED lighting is the new technology of choice, dramatic increase in efficiency, flexibility and longevity. However, those benefits also bring complexity in management, including the need to choose the most appropriate colour of the light. When LEDs were first introduced, they had high levels of blue content, an unscientific term that described their appearance and corresponded to correlated colour temperatures of 4,000 to 6,500 Kelvin. So to point out that this has come from a SLSC briefing, and I'll touch on who they are on the next slide. So they're sort of saying that blue rich lighting is up there in that very high 4,000 to 6,500 Kelvin. So this colour range is good at keeping humans alert to drive safely, but has been scientifically shown to have negative health impacts for interior lighting, and I would say exterior lighting. So particularly ecological impacts for exterior lighting, but also human health impacts. So it's therefore important to manage this trade-off for exterior lighting and use best practice design and the use of modern technology. And I think that's probably where we're heading is, best practice design and use of modern technology, and that's sort of smart controls. So just looking briefly at the human aspect of blue-rich lighting, and that the human eye is adapted to natural illumination conditions. So that's, day, night, full moon, those sort of things, the natural light cycles. It's especially sensitive to light coming from the sky, and that's the blue light. And the angle at which that blue light falls into the retina and intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells in the evening at night is crucial for melatonin production. So you can sort of see from this diagram that this zone here, if light is coming down from the top right, where the sky would be, these photosensitive cells are scattered predominantly around the lower quadrant of the human eye. So we've evolved to become very sensitive to blue-rich light. So these ganglion cells basically drive our human circadian rhythm, which then controls our hormone productions at various times, different hormones at different times of the night. And melatonin is one of those hormones, and it only produces in the human body in darkness. And it's particularly sensitive to blue light, blue-rich light at about 460 nanometers. So that's just touching on, the biological influence of blue light. Here's a classic recent photo. This is the impact of light on crops, and this is a soybean crop. You've got a lamp post in the middle up here beside the street. It's got a light on it, and the spill light from that lamp has encouraged this portion of the crop to continue growing past its normal maturity stage. And so all of that crop in there hasn't produced any soybean. The rest of the crop has reached maturity, produced the pods and been harvested, but this portion has not, because the light that it receives over the 24 hours or over the normally dark cycle has forced it to continue to grow. It just indicates that there is, both a human and environmental issue. So addressing concerns about the blue light content. And this is, I mentioned the SLSC. So the SLSC is a street lighting and smart controls organisation. And they are predominantly based in Australia, but they include New Zealand, the New Zealand Lighting Council, and local government New Zealand. And that's an organisation collective of all of the local district councils around New Zealand. And their sort of preferences are where traffic volumes are low or because it's off-peak period at night, serious consideration should be given to dimming or switching off lighting. So where traffic volumes are high or traffic speeds are high, blue-rich light at around 4,000 is recommended, but in residential areas where vehicle demands are low and pedestrian and community issues are more important, LED colour temperatures of 3,000 Kelvin or less should be used. So that's an interesting coming from an organisation that includes New Zealand sort of regulatory or advisory groups. So my personal comment is that 4,000 there should be reduced to 3,000, and for low pedestrian uses, we should be getting back down to that 2,000 range. So while their thinking is starting to align with the dark skies community, they're still probably sitting at the older, higher colour temperatures. So internationally, there are some really good progress, sort of signals starting to be given. This is the International Commission on Illumination, one of the real leading lighting technology organisations around of the world. They've established a new technical committee on the measurement of obtrusive light and sky glow. So just in May this year, the committee is to provide guidelines and examples for metrics, measurement methods and corresponding instrument specifications. And that's for, monitoring or measuring sky glow. For the measurement of obtrusive light and sky necessary to validate assessment criteria of its effect on the environment. So, they're looking at that environmental impact of light. And the proposed guidelines and examples can be used as a common base with reliable and traceable techniques for various disciplines that are dealing with obtrusive light and sky glow measurements, light pollution assessment and research. So, these leading organisations are really starting to focus some science on the issue. Some science that doesn't just relate to the provision of light, but trying to manage the impact and the appropriate use of light. Another organisation, the Illuminating Engineering Society, these typically based in the States, but New Zealand has a branch. They had a recent seminar working towards darker skies. So the IES have a memorandum of understanding with the International Dark Sky Association. So collaboration to address the global issue of light pollution that negatively affects our environment and the human condition. So again, working for new colour metrics for outdoor lighting, educating municipalities and individuals. So again, organisations getting together, collaborating and starting to apply some science. So New Zealand Conservation, the Royal Astronomical Society New Zealand recently requested that the Minister and DOC include protection of the night environment from light pollution in their general policy statements and national park statements. So the request went to the Minister and Director General of DOC and has been passed on to departmental staff. So in Australia and New Zealand, Australia early last year issued the National Light Pollution Guidelines for Wildlife. So Department of Environment and Energy and the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions in Australia. So Australian government document. I recently received an inquiry from one of the authors of these guidelines wanting contacts within the Department of Conservation. So that's an interesting, development, I guess, that might help prod New Zealand government to start taking light pollution seriously. The same document has been adopted by the Convention on Migratory Species of Wild Animals, and New Zealand New Zealand government is a signatory to this United Nations Convention. So there's just another leverage point we'll make use of. International Union for Conservation of Nature has passed a motion just recently, a week or so ago, at its session in Marseille in France, calls on the Director General of IUCN to assist efforts of members and commissions to reduce light pollution, and recalls that it's everyone's duty to ensure the protection of the nocturnal environment. So there, again, New Zealand is a signatory to this convention. Resource management, version 2. And RASNZ made a submission to the Select Committee with support from affiliated societies, New Zealand Dark Sky Places and interested individuals. And the informal feedback is that these were well received. So thank you for Auckland Society, and a couple of members as well made submissions to that. It's really helpful. Dark and Quiet Skies meeting conference just last week for Science and Society. Yeah, summary. The wild ride of fighting light pollution continues, but we are now starting to see a direction to follow. So I think it's starting to look quite positive overall, that we are starting to make some difference. But now we've got the satellite constellations producing light pollution, obscuring the night sky, radio spectrum pollution, potential damage to receiving observatories, and potential for biological impacts. And that came from that Dark and Quiet Skies conference last week. Keep well and safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We do have a couple of questions from the live stream, if you've got a minute or two.
Can you just give me 1 minute? Just need a comfort stop.
Yep, not a problem. So the extra minute is going to allow a few more people to put some questions in. So if you've got a burning question for Steve when he comes back, and throw it in the chat now.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Steve. Okay, hello. We do have a few questions, not too many.
Sure.
Yep. The first one is from Niven, and he says, thanks for a most informative talk, Steve. I was going to ask about the impact on flora, but your side of the soy field around the street lamp addressed that. But I was also wondering about the impact on other fauna, particularly birds and insects.
Yes, the Australian Light Pollution Guidelines do a very good job of certainly explaining the needs of various marine and related species, which also applies, to terrestrial species as well. Just the certainly the difference between vision for animals, insects, and the difference between different spectral or sensitivity range from those species to the human species and typically the human visual range is far closer to the red end of the spectrum. The insect wildlife stuff is predominantly to the blue end of the spectrum, so introducing blue lighting into their environment is quite disruptive. Disruptive in navigation, predator-prey relationships, feeding, all sorts of impacts. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Steve. Kim also asks, regarding the New Zealand government response, when do you think you may get a response, and have there been any other a comment from any other parties? And just on that, Damien McNamara, who's in chat, also says that he's still waiting on a response from the government in regards to his RMA submission.
Yeah, I think formally the information from the submissions is collated and then presented to the select committee. The select committee then reports, I think, back to government, and at that stage, I think all of the, well, you'll start to see the effects or the results of all of those submissions. So I understand that that next step should be this side of Christmas. So you can go online and look at everybody's submissions. There is a website for that, but not the government's or the committee's reaction to each of those submissions. So I think they got quite a lot of input, and so it'll take a while to work through it all. But yeah, there is a timeline, and I think that the next stage is before Christmas.
Damien commented, anything to do with any type of government is a slow process. It certainly
Absolutely.
is.
Yes.
Robert asks, Auckland has a unitary plan referred to E24 lighting. It clearly states luminance levels for most areas and how far the light is allowed to extend from the source. Do you know if they enforce this, and can we press them if local businesses are obviously pushing past the limit?
I always recommend that you make use of their complaints processes. If people don't complain, they won't do anything. They'll think that everything's fine. So the more the squeakier the wheel, the better. It's unlikely, given my experience across the rest of the country, that they would have compliance people trained to monitor lighting. And of course, it's generally after hours as well. The Mackenzie District Council have recently taken on a compliance officer, and we will shortly be giving him some experience on use of light meters and things, colour analysis, that sort of thing. So it's they do need some education in that area. There's also another New Zealand standard, Australian New Zealand standard 4282 on the control of obtrusive lighting. So it would be worth bringing that standard to their attention, to the Auckland Unitary Authority's attention. That does talk about light spill from out onto streets and private properties and things. But the councils need educating as well.
And the final question is from Alistair, who wants to know, has NZTA indicated that the 2167 Kelvin lights will be applied to other dark sky areas as well?
No, not directly, but I think it's worth, if you've got specific areas that you want to protect, by all means. And I think there's probably discussion going on in places like Kaikoura, where they've got particular needs for, the what do they call them, the shearwaters, the Hutton shearwaters up there. So they've got a specific need, and I think in general, NZTA are becoming more aware of generally the impact of lighting in specific areas. So again, if you've got a specific application or like a dark sky area that you're trying to create, I think that's Alice's situation. It's well worth talking to the local council to get that dispensation from NZTA.
Okay, and that is it for the questions. Thanks very much, Steve, for a really interesting presentation. Abe?
If I could just expand on that last question.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Pushkin.
Yeah. The NZTA, their recommendations are tied to their funding stream. So there is still the ability for a local council to disregard NZTA and go ahead and install an optional lighting system. They may not qualify, though, for the funding that NZTA provide. So there's, and that was part of the Mackenzie situation, is that they were determined to go ahead with that lighting, the lower colour temperature lighting, I think almost regardless of NZTA's approval. But they did get it in the end. And the funding.
It certainly shows it's possible.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you again, Steve. That was super interesting. I always learn something, particularly from your presentations. So thanks again for taking the time to talk to us.
Great. Thank you all. Keep safe.